Welcome to EWBYE's workshop for this year's Toronto Science Fair. We hope you've been enjoying this virtual experience so far and are so glad you decided to watch our video as well. So let me start with a little bit of an introduction about who we are. Engineers Without Borders is a student organization and the biggest chapter of the nonprofit organization EWB Canada, which was founded in 2002. Our main focus is equipping high school students like you with the necessary tools for systemic change, using our initiatives to guide you towards becoming innovators, problem solvers, and leaders. We do this through our initiatives where we further your understanding of local and global development issues and strive to teach you more about collaboration, the engineering design process, and mainly how to utilize your desire for meaningful change. We hope you'll enjoy the short workshop we've prepared for you, and we hope you'll participate in and have some fun with the challenge we'll introduce you to at the end. Without further ado, let's get to it. So even though we're all scattered in different areas, we'd still like to acknowledge the history and treaties with the Indigenous peoples. The land on which U of T operates has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit River for thousands of years now. And so today, this meeting place is still home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we're very grateful to have the opportunity to work on and use this land. So, Youth Engagement, or YE for short, is one of 6 portfolios here at the U of T chapter. Our primary vision is to create a world where youth are not afraid to question societal norms and are instead super empowered to make an impact on issues they are passionate about. We do this through mentorship, leadership, and passion. Through mentorship, we hope to encourage you to become the change you wish to see in your communities by providing you with the support and guidance whenever you need. This can look like workshops such as this one, or something as simple as answering your questions when you have them. Through leadership, we ourselves first step forward to inform you about various global and local issues, and we also hope to inspire you to step forward and take your own action. Finally, we are all very passionate about what we do here at EWB U of T. And by sharing this passion with you, we hope to garner your passions for social change as well. We truly believe that fostering such passion is the first step towards garnering change that is long-term and meaningful. This year, we ran 4 programs, all virtually, called EW Beyond, InnoMasters, YTP, and SCYLC. And although all of our programs have either ended this year, anything in this segment that interests you, watch out for the link to our mailing list so that we can inform you as soon as the initiatives begin next year. Details for those are usually provided in late November, early December, so you can expect mails from us then. Going into a little bit more about what each of these programs do, EW Beyond teaches you how to utilize existing resources to directly tackle some of the issues you're passionate about. Throughout a semester, the EW Beyond team works to bring in guest speakers and other forms of experiential learning to eventually help you launch an initiative that you're proud of. This year, some teams ended up launching their own Instagram pages centering around issues like helping the homeless and raising awareness about environmental issues. InnoMasters is a little bit more structured, and throughout the semester, you will learn about how to employ critical thinking, teamwork, and problem-solving skills through the engineering design process. And the things learned here follow a very similar format to the first-year engineering design courses that a lot of us have to learn here at U of T Engineering. So this is one of our most popular initiatives. YTP is a new program this year, which focuses more heavily on issues related to sustainability and environmental justice specifically. And unlike the other 2, this is done through one-off workshops that each focus on a different issue. SCYLC was a 2-day conference that kind of combines the ideas of EW Beyond and InnoMasters, where there's a case competition at the end to allow you to demonstrate everything you've learned in a friendly competition atmosphere. So those are the initiatives we ran this year. Like I said, if you're interested in any of them, please do sign up for our mailing list so that we can contact you when they are ready to be run again next year. So
In this presentation, we're going to be focusing on the engineering design process. And a lot of this content was adapted from a course that all first years take in engineering at U of T. And actually, all engineers really learn this process in different forms because it's so useful for solving problems in industry. So we've broken down the engineering design process into four basic steps. So the first one is framing. So this involves breaking down the problem into manageable steps and instructions. Next is diverging and converging. So this includes coming up with potential solutions to the problem and then narrowing down the solutions to find a few that are the best options and then trying to choose between those. Next is prototyping and testing, and this involves testing the most relevant designs to see which one would do best in practice. And then finally, it's choosing a final design and a solution that works best for your given problem. So to demonstrate the engineering design process on an actual problem, we've chosen a simple example problem that we're going to go through during the presentation. So this example problem is, how can we transport people and cars across the Madawaska River in Ontario? And this is just a basic problem of transporting people across a river, but we just want to show you the steps in performing this process. So first, we're going to talk about framing the problem. So the first thing to look at here is really stakeholders. So who is affected by the design and what are their needs, wants, and specifications? Because the stakeholders will really affect what design you choose and just to see the impact of your design in the real world, which is really important because engineers have a lot of power and can do a lot of good and make change in the projects they're working on, and they have to make change responsibly for all the stakeholders involved. So in this problem, some example stakeholders are the Ontario government, because they are paying for this problem to be solved. They're paying for the transportation. Next is the construction companies, so the people that are actually building the solution. Another one is the environment and just assessing the environmental impact this has. Next is civilians from surrounding towns and cities, and then lastly, nearby businesses. And this is just a short list, but it's also important to note that stakeholders do not include the users of the design. That's a separate category, and it's important that they're evaluated differently. So it's just other people that are involved in the design. So next, scope is really important for finding a solution to a problem, because this includes what considerations you're going to include and then not include for the problem. And when coming up with a feasible solution to the problem, it's important that you have this scope. So for this problem, the scope is to focus on the Madawaska River in Ontario and transporting only local cars and people from one specific spot on one side of the river to the other. So because it's scoped, so specifically you can take into account the dimensions of the river and the current and things like that. So next is requirements, and this is the functions, objectives, criteria, and constraints. So the functions are what the design must do. So it's the purpose and intended use of the design, and it's a very high level thing. So for this example, the function is to transport cars and people from one side of the river to the other. So it's important that the function is vague, but specific about the base problem that you're trying to solve. Next are the objectives. So this is a bit more specific, and it's what we want the design to accomplish. And then it's also used to evaluate which designs are better than other ones when you're actually looking at solutions. So just to make that a little bit clearer, for this specific problem, some objectives include the initial investment should be within the budget, and the yearly maintenance cost should also be within budget. It should minimize disturbance for local people, should minimize negative environmental impact. It should be easy to use by local citizens, and it should use local construction companies. This could be a preference for the people building the bridge to get local construction companies involved. So you can see by this list of objectives that Not every solution necessarily will meet these objectives in the same way, but we want the design to aim to have these. They're nice to have in the design. And then when we're choosing a solution, you can see how well each objective is met by a design in order to choose the best one. Next is the next one is constraints, and this is similar to objectives, but it's more concrete. So these are the limits that we must put on the design. So for constraints, these are the necessities of the design in order to go through and actually select this design. So if one of these is not met, then we cannot select the design. So for example, for this problem, the government, building, and environmental regulations must be met. And because these are regulations, they must be met or the design cannot be built. And then next, it must hold the weight of cars and people. And this is a safety regulation. Because it's safety, it's very concrete. And if this is not met, you also can't build the design. Then finally, the criteria is how we objectively judge which design is better. So this relates back to the objectives and constraints and just puts numbers and associates numbers with these that we identified previously. So for example, for the initial and yearly budget, we're setting the numbers of $50 million for initial budget and $1 million for yearly budget. Next, for meeting government regulations, this is just a simple yes or no, does it meet them or does it not? And then finally, it must hold a weight of 50,000 kilograms. So you can see here in the criteria, we go back to different objectives and constraints that we already specified, but we're just putting numbers to these objectives and constraints. So we know concretely at the end if we've met them or not. So it's just a way of checking to see if we've met these and setting goals for the design.
The next step in the process is finally designing and picking your alternatives or solutions. Now, this part is a lot more hands-on, so it's considered to be a lot more fun than the theoretical requirements process. However, it's very important to realize that without clearly laying out the problem, it's very hard to come up with useful solutions for your client. So I'll first go through the whole process, and then, as Sarah has been doing, I'll show you how to apply the concepts through a short demo with the Madawaska River problem. Now, the first step is idea generation. And this is where you come up with a whole bunch of potential design ideas by brainstorming in different ways. At this stage, it's important not to get too hung up on making your ideas fit the requirements. Don't restrict yourself as of yet. Now, one activity our first year professors had us do was take a huge sheet of chart paper and spend about 5 minutes jotting down and sketching whatever comes to mind in your specific corner. And then after 5 minutes comes to an end, you rotate the paper so that the other members of your team get to look at your ideas and add, subtract, modify them as they please for another 5 minutes. And you keep doing this until all the members of your team has looked at all of the designs from the other teammates. And this way, you get to kind of refine the ideas that are coming out and begin the diverging process. But what is this divergence I keep talking about? It's basically the second round of idea generation, kind of, except here you pick out a few of your favorite ideas from the first round and begin to redefine them so that they fit the requirements more properly. This can be done through tools like Scamper. Let's take a look at what Scamper is. Scamper is when you take an existing solution and run it through the cycle of substitute, combine, adapt, modify, put to another use, eliminate, and reverse, hence Scamper. It's basically a more formal version of the brainstorming idea I just described. So let's take a closer look at what this looks like. Here's an example of a Scamper diagram. Let me see if I can get the pointer. There we go. So here is an example of a Scamper diagram. You take your requirements and use those to come up with ways of making your design better. For example, if your object is writing has to be permanent, you can substitute the lead for a pencil with an ink nib for a pen. If your objective has to look like an elephant for whatever reason, You can combine an elephant's trunk design with your mug to make an elephant mug design. For easier mobility, you could remove the headboard of the frame to make it lighter and have less components. For a more original design, you can use reverse. For example, this vase looks like this originally, but if you reverse the shape, it has a much more original design, etc., etc. You get the idea. Basically, you can make changes to your design as long as it makes sense for your requirements. This is to make sure that you actually fulfill your client's needs and wants. Now, the next step is convergence. This is where you narrow down your modified designs by comparing them against each other to pick the top 3 to 5 that meet your requirements. And this helps you make sure you choose a final design that your client is happy with, but also that doesn't empty your pockets. So you can for sure take into account things like cost efficiency. And one way to do this is through a criteria comparison chart. Now, criteria comparison chart is where you take the criteria and objectives you developed for the requirements and compare them against each other so that you figure out which performs better. This chart will help you answer questions like, does the design meet all the requirements? How well does it meet the criteria? Can it be improved? Let's take a closer look. So for here, now this chart is for a problem that requires prevention of contamination. Each of the ideas are listed as column headers, and each of the criteria are row headers. First, you have to pick a reference design. Here's the solenoid valve, against which you compare all of the others. For a specific criteria, if the idea performs better, then the reference you give it a plus. If it performs worse, you give it a minus. Let's look at durability. The release cleansing agent performs better than the solenoid valve, so it gets a plus. However, the butterfly valve performs just about the same as the solenoid valve, so it gets a 0. At the end, you sum up all the pluses, the minuses, and the zeros for each design and come up with a net score that helps you decide which one is actually your best design. The numbers don't really have much value other than as a comparison metric for your designs, so don't get too hung up on the fact that, oh, this one has a negative score. Oh, this one has a positive score. It doesn't really matter. Here, as you can see, they decided the butterfly valve and the solenoid valve were 2 of the better ideas for the problem. The final part is picking a final design. So once you go through this process of divergence, convergence, and idea generation, all that's left is to pick your final design, making sure it sticks to all the design requirements and making sure that you can justify why that is the best design. That's very important. You have to be able to advocate for why your design is the best out of all of the ones that you come up with. Now let's see if I can apply it to the transportation problem.
Okay, like I was saying, the next step in the process is to come up with your alternatives and pick the best one. So first, I'm going to give myself 30 seconds to come up with as many solutions as I can for the transportation across Madawaska River problem that you've been solving. So off the top of my head, I can think of a ship. Pretty common way that things are done even now. So probably the most boring solution, but it's a solution nonetheless. Please excuse my terrible drawing too. Bridge. For the life of me, I can't remember how to draw a bridge at this moment, but that's totally fine. Remember, the ideas don't have to be perfectly rendered isometric drawings or anything. You can literally write the ideas down. I can also think of maybe a raft for one car. A special kind of raft that allows the car to float across the river. Remember, we're not thinking of whether it can meet all of the criteria at this point. Raft for one car. I can also think of maybe a platform with water skis attached to it. Like I said, at this point, the ideas can literally be as crazy as you want them to be. We'll be refining them later. I can think of maybe a jet ski pulling a raft. Hey, maybe these two ideas are connected. So I'm gonna just do a link like that and say connected to remind myself later. And that's all. I'll stop there now. Otherwise I can keep coming up with crazy ideas like teleportation devices. Okay, next, divergence. We're gonna try and use Scamper to combine or to modify these ideas to make them better fit some of the requirements. The requirement I'm gonna focus on is minimal negative environmental impact. So a ship
although very good for solving the problem, probably has a lot of negative impact on the river itself. So how about we make it runs on water power? So it can have generators or water turbines that generates the power it needs to go across the river. For a bridge, we can make, I don't know, tiny birdhouses, not tiny, birdhouses to allow birds to sit on it. And that's two ways I've made these two ideas have a lesser and negative environmental impact. Can we combine any of these ideas? Like I said, for this one, this connection, maybe I can say combine these two. Combining them then allows us to transport things at faster speed. Erase. Well, if we erase the kind of bigger, bulkier designs of the ship, you get this platform with a raft. So I've already kind of subconsciously done that. And that's kind of how we apply Scamper. We go through the ideas and see, is there anything I can change or any way I can modify things to make these better fit the requirements? Next, let's try and build a sort of, not a comprehensive one, but a small comparison chart. I'm gonna put my ideas at the top. So platform, ship, bridge, and jet skis. Now I have modified the jet skis and the raft to combine them, so that's considered one idea over here. And I'm still gonna just look at the environmental side and maybe cost. Environmental impact and cost. Now, since ship is a pretty common way to solve this problem, I'm going to use this as my reference and compare the others. Environmental impact, a bridge definitely has less impact than a ship, and so does a platform and raft and jet skis. So better. If they perform better, if they have less of an environmental impact than the ship, then they get a plus. For cost, they also probably, a raft and jet skis would probably cost a lot just because you need to modify them a lot to fit some of the other requirements, like transporting 50,000 kilograms of weight. A raft and jet skis is probably not ideal for that. That's why I'm giving it a negative. A platform probably has less of an cost, but also requires a lot of modification. And a bridge definitely costs less. But I haven't done any research on this, so typically you would do some research to support your judgments as well. So I would look up the cost of a bridge and the cost of a ship and compare them before putting this plus sign. You don't have to do too much extensive research at this point, but just a little bit to help give you better ratings. And I'm going to sum them up. 2, 2, 1. And I'm going to say my top 3 ideas are the platform, ship, and bridge. There we go. Now I've used a flowchart to come up with my top 3. And then after some other comparison with some of the other objectives, I decide, hey, a ship is probably the best way to go. So I'm going to pick, say this is my final design. Now I haven't really shown, there's no need for you to stop at just a flowchart when you're comparing things. You can do a lot more iteration of this divergence and convergence process before you pick your final design, but this is the general process on how to get there.
So finally, we're going to be talking about prototyping and testing. So a prototype is a tangible representation of your design that can be subject to some sort of test to evaluate its performance. So as you can see on the slide here, the whole engineering design process is very cyclical. So you have defining the design requirements, generating ideas, and selecting a potential solution, which we've talked about previously. Then it moves into the prototyping and testing stage. So first you design the prototype and then you test it. And then you present the results to a variety of people depending on the stage you are in the design. So for example, early on, you could be presenting to peers to get feedback or your company, or later on in the process when you have a final design, you could be presenting to people like investors. So since it's so cyclical, if there's a problem in the prototyping, either in the design or the testing, you go back to earlier stages and revise your design, such as you go back to generating ideas or selecting a potential solution or just tweaking the design you already have, and then go through testing again and iterating like that. And the purpose of this is really to come up with a design that solves the problem the best it can and to generally learn as you go in terms of coming up with a design. So depending on the stage of the design lifecycle you're in, different types of prototypes can be used. So for example, low fidelity prototypes are very simple and low tech, and they're generally used in the early stages of a design to show concepts and show how the concepts will work. Next, there are high fidelity prototypes. So these are usually more functional and interactive, and they happen near the end of the project and near the final design. And they're usually used to test usability and see how users will interact with the final design and see if there are any final tweaks that need to be done. So now that you've learned about prototyping and testing a little bit, we're going to be showing an example using the problem that we've gone through the case. So I will be showing a low fidelity prototype of a sketch, and I'll be sketching a design of a ferry that will transport people from one side of the river to the other. And then Jantel will be building a very low tech bridge prototype using paper. And this is just to show you some of the things that people do in the early stages of the design to test out concepts about the solution. So now that you've learned about the engineering design process, it's your turn to put it into practice. So we've created a mini design challenge for you to take a real problem and then go through the engineering design process. So you can see here linked on the slide is a blank worksheet that highlights a problem, and then there's space to go through the engineering design process. So once you've gone through the worksheet, you have the option to submit your final prototype to a Google form where we will provide feedback and choose the best design. And the best design will get a prize, but all the submissions will also be featured on our website at Youth Engagement EWB. So if you have any questions about the worksheet, feel free to email us at ye.uoft@gmail.com. Or if you have any questions about the presentation in general, feel free to email us. As well, if you're interested in signing up for our programs next year, you can also sign up for the mailing list linked on the slide. So thank you so much for listening to our presentation. We really hoped you learned something about the engineering design process and engineering in general.